Welcome to chapter 39 of the book of Isaiah. Continues with Hezekiah in a more of a historical chapter, along with the two previous ones, rather than going into a talk about the future and near future and prophecy of times towards the end and these things that Isaiah is bringing out. A lot of it is a sort of a mystery. We only realize what some of the things that Isaiah saw today that were not available for people a little bit before, because some of these things have to do with modern inventions, airplanes, flying ships that mentioned in there, and then there's at the end times, commerce is all through the internet. All these things a lot of these things are referred to in cryptic form in the book of Isaiah, except for these three chapters, which are more of a historical event in the life of Isaiah the prophet. So it begins in that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, the king of Vasileus of Babylonias, sent epistolas and epistles. They were to be read aloud and to the king and whoever, I guess, was in the court, and presvis. You can add that to your English derivatives book. An ambassador, presbytes or elders, your ambassadors, and Dora, gifts to Hezekiah. Named Dora. It's an old name, but it was used a lot of women in the earlier part of last century. The 20th century, Dora means gift. Sent gifts to Hezekiah, for he heard that he was infirm unto death. Thanatology, study of death, and was raised up. And that was in the 38th chapter. We hear all about that. We read about that, and we're at the end. Hezekiah was given 15 more years to live. And Hezekiah rejoiced over them with great joy and showed to them the house of the spices. Well, somebody comes that's interested in you, it gives you joy. I have a man who comes and visits me, and it gives me joy. When I come, we get to talk about things, and he's not a believer, but I try to bring in things out about the Lord the best I can to him, but still, and then I get other people coming. It's a joy to receive people. I like it. So Hezekiah did too. Somebody's coming, and they obviously were from another nation, and probably brought money and things here. But what did Hezekiah do? He showed to them the houses of the spices and of the argyriu. Argentina comes from that word. Silver, and of the chryseu, the chrysanthemum, golden flower, gold, and the balsam, and the incenses. I think balsam is some type of a gum material. And the incenses, I think they possibly burned it, I'm not sure. And of the perfumed liquid, miru, we have myrrh, comes from that. I should have highlighted it. In all the houses of the items of the gazis, the treasury, in all as much as was in his thesavris, treasuries. And now we see you got the same English word, but you have two different Greek words. Actually, gazis is I believe, a Persian name for a treasury. It's what Persia called them. In thesavris, we have a thesaurus, treasury of words, a book. Thesavris is Greek. So his treasuries, and the gazis was a certain type of a treasure, I think, and I'm not exactly sure what. You can look it up, I'm sure, on the internet, on Wikipedia, and find out. And there was not one thing which Hezekiah did not show to them. Showed them everything in his house. And Isaiah the prophetess came pros ton Vasileia Ezekian. And he said to him, well, what did these men say? And from what place have they come to you? Well, I don't think he said what they said, but he said and Hezekiah said, from out of a land at a distance, they have come to me from out of Babylon. Well, we go down to our map, and we'll see here, Babylon is a city, and it's right here, Babylon, the city. And Babylonia is their empire, and it went all the way, all this yellow area that they had taken. Now this Merodach-Baladan who came, he was a Babylonian, he was a Chaldean actually. Chaldeans were down here in the southern part towards the Persian Gulf, tribal people. And up here in Nineveh, this is where the Assyrian Empire had its capital, Nineveh, and the Syrians basically had the same area. All was Assyria. And the Assyrian era, which Merodach-Baladan was in at this time, he revolted. He came to Babylon here, and he revolted against King Sennacherib. Remember, Sennacherib was the one who came down against Hezekiah. And Sennacherib was from Nineveh. Remember, he went back to Nineveh after he couldn't take Jerusalem, and his two sons killed him and went up into Armenia. So at that time, though, before he was killed, Sennacherib was warring with Babylon. And in 689, Sennacherib, that would have been before he went over to Jerusalem, he went down and he captured the city of Babylon in 689, and he completely destroyed it, just wiped it off the face of the earth almost, and just down to the ground, destroyed all the buildings. And Babylon was a center of certain religious people, and like the Magi, and so it was a real disaster for the people that looked at Babylon as a spiritual center of this area. So anyway, Sennacherib's son, Esarhaddon, came down to Babylon, and he rebuilt the city, Babylon, and then he lived in it. So, but he was still an Assyrian king. And then Ashurbanipal, who was Esarhaddon's son, that would have been the grandson of Sennacherib, he was ruling back up in Nineveh where his grandfather did, and he came down and against Babylon again the second time, and against Ashurbanipal. I'm going to get these straight. Ashurbanipal was Esarhaddon's son who ruled in Nineveh. So Ashurbanipal came down and against Esarhaddon and defeated Babylon again and destroyed it the second time. And that was around 612 to 605 that was destroyed. And then well, actually, a little before that, at 612 and 605, then there was a war basically between these Chaldeans that had come up, Merodach-Baladan. These were like 50 years or so or later, or maybe less. But anyway, this Merodach-Baladan fought against, and his people fought against the Assyrians that came down from Nineveh and defeated them. And so that was the end of the Assyrian Empire. In 605, the Chaldeans, which came up here into Babylon, took Nineveh, and then the Babylonian Empire was built, and these kings went and conquered land. And the main king that conquered all this land was Nebuchadnezzar the second, and he reigned for 43 years between 605 and 562, in 43 years. So right after the defeat of the Nineveh and the Assyrians, then Nebuchadnezzar, the second rule, and he came down. Nebuchadnezzar came down against Jerusalem and finally took it. The Babylonian Empire then was destroyed by the Persian Empire in 539. So the Babylonian Empire only lasted for 65 years. We see things in the New Testament about Babylon, and like I mentioned before, that I don't see that as being anything to do with this area and this country or this city, because it was great, but it was they had an army came down, but it was the city of Babylon itself. We have another map here. We'll go to that map. There's the city of Babylon, and it's not all that great. It's only I think about 2 miles. Here is 500 meters, maybe about 2 miles across, and 1 mile this way. So that's not a very big city in 1 mile by 2 miles. I mean, it's actually very small. So to put this in the New Testament about Babylon falling and all these things about Babylon, so many people have been taught that, the Babylon was some type of a great city, but it really wasn't. For its time it was, I suppose, but on the whole, it didn't last really that long. 65 years, the whole empire lasted. It was destroyed 2 times earlier, and then it went into disrepair afterwards. There in the Persian area by Cyrus the Great, and then it was taken over by the Persians, and it became a capital city of one of the Persian satrapies, and pretty much just went into disuse. So this is the Babylon and the Babylonians that have now come across, and they go around the Fertile Crescent and come down, and they have come to Hezekiah from out of this Babylonian area, even though at the time they're not ruling the area. It's still an Assyrian empire is still in rule. And then Isaiah said, "What did they see in your house?" And Hezekiah said, "Well, all the things in my house they beheld, and there's not anything in my house which they did not behold, but even the things in my treasuries." So he's bragging to the people and showing them the things that he has. He showed them everything. And Isaiah said to him, "Kuson to logon Kyriou Sabaoth." Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. And the exclamation is the imperative. Hear, listen to the word of the Lord of hosts. And Isaiah is speaking the words from God. That's quite a thing to be able to say. Now, whether Hezekiah took that in as such, I don't think he completely did, because we'll see what happens. And it says, Isaiah says in verse 6, "Behold, days come, and they, the Babylonians, shall take all the things in your house, and as much as your fathers brought together until this day." All the things in the temple, everything in the nation, and in Jerusalem. "And it shall come unto Babylon, which it did with Nebuchadnezzar. And not one thing in any way should survive." One thing. He took it all. This is why Isaiah is prophesying this. "And God said, for even of your children whom you engendered, they shall take. And they shall be made castrati in the eunuchs, that is, in the house of the king of the Babylonians." So, bragging about what you have is probably something that we all do. I was mentioning this man that comes and visits me every once in a while, and he likes to wear corduroy pants, and I enjoy corduroy pants, and they're hard to find, and he runs across them, but I couldn't find any. And on the internet, I looked Amazon to buy some, and they're very expensive and hard to find, and they're not very good like the ones that were made 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I went on to eBay and I found these older pair. Some of them have never been used, and I bought about 3 or 4 of these pants. So the next time the fellow came over, I wanted to make sure to show him all these corduroy pants. Now I read this and I'm thinking, oh no, I hope he doesn't rob me now, because he sees everything that I have in my house. But I'm just making the point that, we should be careful in bragging, because it's not what the Lord really wants us to do. But we fall into it so easily, to brag about the things we have and buy flashy clothes or flashy cars or flashy jewelry and so forth. And it could be taken away like it was from Hezekiah. But what did Hezekiah, how did he react to this? He says, and Hezekiah said to Isaiah, well, the word of the Lord's good, which you spoke. Let there be indeed peace and righteousness in my days. So basically, I don't really think he believed the words of Isaiah the prophet. It's basically he's thinking about himself, just as he was when he wanted to live longer. And he's thinking about himself here. As long as it doesn't affect me, I could care less. And what would be the opposite? The opposite would be for asking forgiveness to God that we did this bragging, and then ask what we can do to make up for it. If there's something that we can do. Maybe like me, well, maybe I should give away these pants, take them to the Goodwill or someplace, or one of them or something, to make up for my bragging to this fellow. And maybe this is what God would have expected from Hezekiah. But to not even care because it's going to be in the future, that's not what God wanted, but yet that was Hezekiah. Even though he was a good king, he had his flaws just like we all do. Short chapter, chapter 40, a voice yelling in the wilderness. And we've heard that in the New Testament. And we'll find out who that voice is that's yelling in the wilderness in chapter 40. I hope you join us in the next video seminar, and God bless.